Good morning. I am very, very happy to be with you this morning, in part because a lot has happened in my life since the last time I saw you. Most notably, I have been catapulted into the life of a pastor, hoping to be ordained in a year or so. On July 1st, I began working at a little Presbyterian church in Bordentown, New Jersey. The congregation has welcomed my partner Robert and me with open arms. When we first moved in, there were fresh flowers waiting for us at the church manse. And after our first Sunday, I was served the best, I'm not exaggerating, the best chocolate cake I've ever tasted. There are 40 or 50 or so attendees at this church at any given Sunday, at least 10 or so of whom have been members of the church longer than I've been alive. So I am truly grateful, and it is truly humbling to be there. I'm also the first openly gay pastor at this 150-year-old church, and so I've been told the first openly gay pastor in the city of Bordentown. This knowledge both frightens and excites me. I think there's more excitement than fear. I'm encouraged by the thought that I have a distinctly meaningful vocation in this place, as both a queer person and a Christian minister. Since beginning this pastoral role just a few weeks ago, I've been especially mindful of the gifts, the conversations, the experiences, the ideas, the stories, the countless gifts that have guided and escorted me to this distinct vocation. Our ancient testimony this morning that Valerie read for us is one of those gifts. This story in Acts 10 has encouraged and empowered me as I've made this journey from being a closeted, homeschooled evangelical boy from Texas to being who I am today. So this morning, I'd just like to share with you why this story in Acts 10 has been so meaningful and so liberative for me personally. And then I'd like to reflect with you a bit on the very last sentence of our ancient testimony, because in it, I see a distinct exhortation for this congregation. Now, the chapter, Acts 10, that our ancient testimony is drawn from is 50 verses long, so we are going to move quickly and hit the high points. It all starts with a man named Cornelius. He's a Roman military commander, so he is a Gentile, not a Jew. And because the book of Acts is, for the most part, a book about and by Jews, specifically Jews who have come to regard Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah, Cornelius is a bit of an outsider to our overarching narrative. However, the text opens by telling us that he is a man of devotion. He's a man who prays constantly. He's a man who gives alms generously. So he's an outsider who acts an awful lot like an insider, or at least like an insider is supposed to act. An angel comes to him. An angel calls him by name. An angel tells Cornelius that his alms and his prayers have been heard by God, the God of this book of Acts. And then the angel tells him to send some of his men a day's and a night's journey away to a place where a man named Peter is residing, to get Peter and to bring Peter back to Cornelius' household. Cornelius does so. Off his men go. Fast forward a day, and we meet Peter. It's about noon, and he's up on top of a roof praying. Suddenly, a vision interrupts Peter's prayer. It's nothing flashy or grand. There's this big sheet that's spread out, and it's descending from the sky, and it's coming closer and closer toward him. And as soon as he can make out what's on the top of this sheet, he is appalled. See, there are certain animals on top of this sheet in Peter's vision. Peter has been taught, ever since he was a little boy, that Jews don't touch certain animals. The Gentiles do. They touch, they eat those things. But you, Peter, you're not one of those people. That's the message he's received all his life. And yet here, suddenly in this vision that interrupts his prayer, God tells him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." No command, I would imagine, could come as more of a surprise to Peter. This is turning his world upside down, commanding him to abandon a religious custom that's defined who he is. So understandably, Peter protests. "By no means, Lord, for I have never touched anything that is profane or unclean." God's response sounds like something of a rebuke. What God has made clean, you must not call profane. So what's this vision about? What's it doing here in this chapter of Acts 10? Seems to me that as a whole, this chapter is focusing as an explanation, as an account for why this emerging community, this Christian community, has abolished this religious custom. Because they've done away with clean and unclean foods and with categories of clean and unclean people as well. This story is meant to give us an account of why this emerging community is doing this. And it seems that for them, this abolition of this religious custom is meant to signify something much bigger. It's meant to signify for them God's inclusive love for all people, for Jew and Gentile alike. It's meant to signify for Peter and for this emerging community that all people are welcome to join God's family. And so when God responds to Peter and says, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane," God's saying that for you guys, there aren't going to be any categories of clean or unclean food, and likewise, any categories of clean or unclean people. That's what Peter's vision is all about. And then suddenly it's over, and Peter's up on the rooftop, and Cornelius's men arrive to the house. They tell him that this Roman military officer has sent them to him to bring him back a day's and a night's journey away to meet with this Roman military officer. I imagine Peter is still reeling from his vision, and he agrees. So off they go, and they get to Cornelius' household, and there's so much that could be said about what happens there, but we've got to move quickly. So Peter arrives, and once he gets into Cornelius' household, he says to those who have assembled there, "You yourselves know that it is unlawful for a Jew to associate with or to visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean." Cornelius then introduces himself to Peter, and as he speaks, it becomes apparent to Peter that the Spirit of God is alive and well in this person. Peter then responds, "I now truly understand that God shows no partiality, but that in every nation, anyone who fears God and does what is right is acceptable to God." Those are Peter's words to Cornelius and to his household. Peter then goes on to share his understanding of the gospel, and then, once he's done, we have our ancient testimony. The Spirit of God descends on this assembly of Gentiles in a visible, audible, tangible way. And Peter's posse, people who he's brought with him, are astounded. They don't know what to do. They didn't know that God would do all this among these kinds of people. Notice how in our ancient testimony, Peter phrases the question. He doesn't say anything like, "Should we let these people in? Are these people allowed to be baptized?" Peter's question is not that of a self-righteous gatekeeper. It's the question of a bewildered witness, throwing up his hands. Can anyone withhold water for baptizing these people who have received the Spirit of God just as we have? See, it doesn't matter what Peter thinks. about whether Cornelius is worthy or unworthy to receive baptism. What matters is that Cornelius is a person of devotion, a person of generosity, a person who honors the divine in the world around him, and all of this is evidence that the Spirit already resides with Cornelius. For those who have eyes to see and ears to hear and minds and hearts to accept it, Cornelius, this Gentile, has received the Spirit of God, the same God as Peter's God. And so who is Peter? Who is anyone to keep him an outsider of the faith? When I was a kid, years before I told my mom that I was gay, she would tell me again and again, "Willie, you have the Spirit of God inside of you." For her, it was a way of doing several things. It was a way of exhorting me to exemplary behavior. It was also a way of assuring me when I made a mistake that I was still okay. It was one of her most frequent ways of showing love for me. And throughout my childhood, my memory is of my mom as being as confident of God's work in my life and God's presence in my life as she was of anything in the world. And as I look back on that now, I say thank God that that confidence stuck with me. Because when I got to high school, my youth pastor told me that there was no such thing as a gay Christian. When I got to college and coming out would have meant losing the ministry that I had given my life to. When I entered young adulthood and began recovering from years of false shame, in all of that I still knew deep down that the Spirit of God was inside of me. And no matter what Peter says, or my youth pastor, or anyone in my home church back in Texas, I know that God says to me, like God said to Cornelius, this man is clean. He is free, and he is clean, and he is loved, and no one can quench the Spirit inside of him. That's what this story in Acts 10 has done for me over the years. But there's something else I want to share. In closing, I want us to take a closer look at the very last sentence in our ancient testimony. Then Cornelius' household invited Peter to stay for several days. Now, I think it's so easy to gloss over this, but it's actually a very weighty statement. Peter has already violated the law that he grew up with. He has already made himself unclean by stepping into Cornelius' home. And although the encounter went surprisingly well, and although Peter now claims to know that Gentiles are just as clean as he is, it must have been very hard to accept that invitation. It would involve much more than a brief testimony, a few conversations, and a feel-good religious experience. It would involve sitting at the same table. It would have involved sharing silences together. It would have involved daily, mundane activities for a few days. So when I think of this, I can't help but think of my hometown in Texas. I can't help but think of the white and black churches who may come together once a year for a special worship service. So they'll come together, and it'll start out a little tense, but by the end, most people are feeling loose and feeling happy. The service will end, and the white people will come up to each other, and they'll say things like, "That went really well." And you know, I really enjoyed myself today. And there will be undoubtedly in the back a great spread of food all ready to be eaten, tables and chairs open, but guess what? Most of the white people won't stay. Most of them will get in their cars and drive to the other side of town and come back in a year. Friends, in our ancient testimony, Peter's calling is so much more than stepping into Cornelius' home. And his calling is certainly not just to theologically affirm the claim that Gentiles and Jews are equal in the sight of God. No, his calling includes staying with Cornelius' family for several days. And likewise, Judson, our calling is so much more than just attending the rally. And our calling is certainly not just to say the right things about the world's innumerable number of outsiders and the injustices they suffer. It's so much more than that. It includes staying for the meal. It includes conversations. It includes silences. Our calling, Judson, is life together. But it starts with staying for the meal. Amen.